Chapters 67 through 70 of Tristram Shandy, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ted Drury. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, Volume 3, by Laurence Sterne, Chapters 67 through 70. Chapter 70. With 2 or 3 other trinkets, small in themselves, but of great regard, which poor Tom, the corporal's unfortunate brother, had sent him over, with the account of his marriage with the Jew's widow, there was a Montero cap and 2 Turkish tobacco pipes. The Montero cap I shall describe by and by. The Turkish tobacco pipes had nothing particular in them. They were fitted up and ornamented as usual, with flexible tubes of morocco leather and gold wire, and mounted at their ends, the one of them with ivory, the other with black ebony, tipped with silver. My father, who saw all things in lights different from the rest of the world, would say to the corporal that he ought to look upon these 2 presents more as tokens of his brother's nicety than his affection. Tom did not care, Trim, he would say, to put on the cap, or to smoke in the tobacco pipe of a Jew. God bless your honour, the corporal would say, giving a strong reason to the contrary. How can that be? The Montero cap was scarlet, of a superfine Spanish cloth, dyed in grain, and mounted all round with fur, except about 4 inches in the front, which was faced with light blue, slightly embroidered, and seemed to have been the property of a Portuguese quartermaster, not of foot, but of horse, as the word denotes. The corporal was not a little proud of it, as well for its own sake as the sake of the giver. So seldom or never put it on but upon gala days, and yet never was a Montero cap put to so many uses, for in all controverted points, whether military or culinary, provided the corporal was sure he was in the right, it was either his oath, his wager, or his gift. 'Twas his gift in the present case. I'll be bound, said the corporal, speaking to himself, to give away my Montero cap to the first beggar who comes to the door, if I do not manage this matter to his honour's satisfaction. The completion was no further off than the very next morning, which was that of the storm of the counterscarp betwixt the lower Dule, to the right, and the gate St. Andrew, and on the left, between St. Magdalen's and the river. As this was the most memorable attack in the whole war, the most gallant and obstinate on both sides, and, I must add, the most bloody too, for it cost the allies themselves that morning above 1100 men, my uncle Toby prepared himself for it with a more than ordinary solemnity. The eve which preceded, as my uncle Toby went to bed, he ordered his Ramillies wig, which had laid inside out for many years in the corner of an old campaigning trunk, which stood by his bedside, to be taken out and laid upon the lid of it, ready for the morning. And the very first thing he did in his shirt, when he stepped out of bed, my uncle Toby, after he had turned the rough side outwards, put it on. This done, he proceeded next to his breeches, and having buttoned the waistband, he forthwith buckled on his sword belt, and had got his sword half-way in, when he considered he should want shaving, and that it would be very inconvenient doing it with his sword on, so took it off. And essaying to put on his regimental coat and waistcoat, my uncle Toby found the same objection in his wig, so that went off too. So that with one thing and what with another, as always falls out when a man is in the most haste, 'twas 10 o'clock, which was half an hour later than his usual time, before my uncle Toby sallied out. Chapter 68. My uncle Toby had scarce turned the corner of his yew hedge, which separated his kitchen garden from his bowling green, when he perceived the corporal had begun the attack without him. Let me stop and give you a picture of the corporal's apparatus, and of the corporal himself in the height of his attack, just as it struck my uncle Toby, as he turned towards the sentry-box, where the corporal was at work, for in nature there is not such another, nor can any combination of all that is grotesque and whimsical in her works produce its equal. The corporal. Tread lightly on his ashes, ye men of genius, for he was your kinsman. Weed his grave clean, ye men of goodness, for he was your brother. O corporal, had I thee but now that I am able to give thee a dinner and protection, how would I cherish thee! Thou shouldst wear thy Montero cap every hour of the day, and every day of the week, and if it was worn out, I would purchase thee a couple like it. But alas, 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 now that I can do this in spite of their reverences, the occasion is lost, for thou art gone. Thy genius fled up to the stars from whence it came, and that warm heart of thine, with all its generous and open vessels, compressed into a clod of the valley. But what is this, to that future and dreaded page, where I look towards the velvet pall, decorated with the military ensigns of thy master, the first, the foremost of created beings, where I shall see thee, faithful servant, laying his sword and scabbard with trembling hand across his coffin, and then returning pale as ashes to the door, to take his mourning horse by the bridle, to follow his hearse, as he directed thee, where all my father's assistants shall be baffled by his sorrows, and in spite of his philosophy, I shall behold him, as he inspects the lacquered plate, twice taking his spectacles off from his nose, to wipe away the dew which nature has shed upon them. When I see him cast in the rosemary with an air of disconsolation, which cries through my ears, O Toby, in what corner of the world shall I seek thy fellow? Gracious powers, which erst have opened the lips of the dumb in his distress, and made the tongue of the stammerer speak plain, when I shall arrive at this dreaded page, deal not with me then with a stinted hand. Chapter 69. The corporal, who the night before had resolved in his mind to supply the grand desideratum of keeping up something like an incessant firing upon the enemy during the heat of the attack, had no further idea in his fancy at that time than a contrivance of smoking tobacco against the town, out of one of my uncle Toby's 6 field pieces, which were planted on each side of his sentry box, the means of effecting which occurring to his fancy at the same time, though he had pledged his cap, he thought it in no danger from the miscarriage of his projects. Upon turning it this way and that a little in his mind, he soon began to find out, that by means of his 2 Turkish tobacco pipes, with the supplement of 3 smaller tubes of wash leather at each of their lower ends, to be tagged by the same number of tin pipes fitted to the touch holes, and sealed with clay next the cannon, and then tied hermetically with waxed silk at their several insertions into the morocco tube, he should be able to fire the 6 field pieces all together, and with the same ease as to fire one. Let no man say from what tags and jags hints may not be cut out for the advancement of human knowledge. Let no man who has read my father's first and second beds of justice ever rise up and say again, from collision of what kinds of bodies light may or may not be struck out, to carry the arts and sciences up to perfection. Heaven, thou knowest how I love them. Thou knowest the secrets of my heart, and that I would this moment give my shirt. Thou art a fool, Shandy, says Eugenius, for thou hast but a dozen in the world, and 'twill break thy set. No matter for that, Eugenius. I would give the shirt off my back to be burnt into tinder, were it only to satisfy one feverish inquirer how many sparks at one good stroke a good flint and steel could strike into the tail of it. Think ye not that in striking these in, he might, peradventure, strike something out? As sure as a gun. But this project, by the bye. The corporal sat up the best part of the night in bringing his to perfection, and having made a sufficient proof of his cannon, with charging them to the top with tobacco, he went with contentment to bed. Chapter 70. The corporal had slipped out about 10 minutes before my uncle Toby, in order to fix his apparatus, and just give the enemy a shot or 2 before my uncle Toby came. He had drawn the 6 field pieces for this end, all close up together in front of my uncle Toby's sentry box, leaving only an interval of about 1.5 yards betwixt the 3, and on the right and left, for the convenience of charging and such, and the sake possibly of 2 batteries, which he might think double the honour of 1. In the rear, and facing this opening, with his back to the door of the sentry box, for fear of being flanked, had the corporal wisely taken his post. He held the ivory pipe, appertaining to the battery on the right, betwixt the finger and thumb of his right hand, and the ebony pipe tipped with silver, which appertained to the battery on the left, betwixt the finger and thumb of the other, and with his right knee fixed firm upon the ground, as if in the front rank of his platoon, was the corporal, with his Montero cap upon his head, furiously playing off his 2 cross batteries at the same time against the counter-guard, which faced the counter-scarp, where the attack was to be made that morning. His first intention, as I said, was no more than giving the enemy a single puff or 2, but the pleasure of the puffs, as well as the puffing, had insensibly got hold of the corporal, and drawn him on from puff to puff, into the very height of the attack, by the time my uncle Toby joined him. 'Twas well for my father that my uncle Toby had not his will to make that day. End of chapters 67 through 70.